is so very easy. My name is Laura, and it is time for Block 10 of the free follow-along block of the month called Rainbow Sorbet. And Block 10 means we're halfway done. It's been a free follow-along from Quilting Confections. I'll put a link in the description so you can go in, download those patterns, and follow along. I like to mark up my patterns. What I do is I read the pattern first, and I'll make notes as I go along. So in a sense, I'm sewing it in my head before I even start the cutting. We're going to start with fabric A, and it is a 4.5 inch square, and that's the center of the block. B, we need 8 2.5 inch squares. C, 4 2.5 inch squares. D, 4 3.5 inch squares, and E, we need 4 rectangles, 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. For the background fabric, we need 3 different sizes. So what I've done is I've labeled each one of those sizes. I've ended with fabric E, so I'm now at F, G, and H. And by labeling them, it's just going to be easier for me to be able to match up my pieces. I have little arrows where I'm going to put pieces together. My H and my B are going to go together, and they will eventually equal a 4.5 inch. I have my G and my D going together, and they're going to equal 2.5 inches. By making these notes, it helps me keep things organized. So for the background fabrics, I'm going to do F, which is 4 2.5 inch squares, G, 4 3.5 inch squares, and H, rectangles, and there's 4 of them, 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. My H and my B are going to go together, and my G and D are going to go together. We have 2 piles that we're going to need to work with. The others are already cut to the size that we need. The B and the H, we need to make flying geese units. And the D and G, we're going to make half square units. Let's start with the flying geese units. We're going to need 4 flying geese units, 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches, which means it's going to remain this size once we put the corners on. The corners started at 2.5 inch squares. Each square is going to be stitched on each side. With the right sides together and matching 3 edges, we need to draw a line from corner to corner. Normally when we stitch, we usually stitch right on the line, but in this case, if you stitch right beside that line, going towards this top point, it's going to make room for the thread. So when you fold the corner over, it's going to make a perfect block. Your stitching line and that drawn line are going to be touching each other. You're just not stitching on top of it, you're stitching beside it. So we have the line we drew from corner to corner, and the stitching line is right beside it. And that tiny little space is giving us enough room to accommodate the thread thickness. Even though thread is not that thick, it does have a little bit of thickness to it. Now when this corner is folded back, you'll see that there's no fabric hanging on the edge, on the front or on the back. And when you see that there's no fabric hanging out on either side, you know the block is going to stay the shape you started with. To avoid stretching, I do like to just finger press that to that point. Now we can trim off this corner. This goes back. It still has the same size as 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. The next thing is putting the second corner on. We match up the 3 edges. We have a line drawn from corner to corner going to the top of this V. If the line is in the wrong area, you're going to be making a long, thin piece, not that arrow that we're looking for. Treat this the same as you did this corner, stitching right beside that line, and then finger pressing and trimming that corner off. We now have 4 of these units. We now get to put D and G together, and they started off at 3.5 inch squares. Match up right sides, draw a line from corner to corner, and in this case we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch on each side. So we have a 1/2 inch space down the center. That line that we drew from center to center, we get to cut on it. You can use a rotary cutter or you can use scissors. we need to turn these squares into 2.5-inch squares. If you've been following along, we've been using the Quilt in a Day 6.5 square up ruler. It has 2 measurements on it. It has the regular inches and some measurements with 1/2 inches. Because we need a 2.5-inch square, we're going to use that 2.5-inch line. That line sits right on top of the stitching line, and we get to trim this down. Now when we open that up, it's going to be 2.5-inch square. We will have a couple of dog ears that it would be nice if we could trim off. We will need 8 of these half-square units. Once the flying geese units and the half-square triangle units are done, we're going to make 4 corners. For the 4 corners, we're going to need the half-square triangles, pieces C and F, which are those 2.5-inch squares. And because we're going to be making 4 corners, we could just leave them stacked together in 4s. So we're going to start with that background fabric, the 4 2.5-inch squares of C, and then we divide this pile in half so that we have 4 in each pile, and they're going to go together so that the dark sides are pointing inside. And to sew them together, we need to sew them together in sets of 2, and then press those seams going towards the solid piece. So they're going to be opposing each other. Then when we go to sew them together, those seams are going to nestle up. When the 4 pieces are sewn together, we need to take those seams and press them going towards the bottom. These 4 corners will now equal a 4.5-inch square. We're going to put them aside and make the side pieces. We will need the flying geese and piece number E. We need 4 units, so we can just stack them together in sets of 4. The large opening of that flying geese needs to go towards the rectangle units, and just stitch those units together. And the seams need to be pressed towards this large solid piece. We now have 4 corners, 4 inside arms, and a centerpiece. We can put them together. We start with our A block, and the corners are going to, well, go in the corners. The white is going to be facing out on all 4 corners. And with those inside units, the flying geese is going to come into the center so that solid piece is pointing out. So what we've created is a star within a star. Sew this unit together. So the 3 blocks together for the top, 3 at the bottom, and the 3 to the inside. Press the blocks going in to the inside, and then the top and the bottom are going to go out, and those corners are going to match up perfectly. Block 10 is now done. It's such a pretty block. And as I've been following along, I've made a second block in a different color variation, a scrappy color variation. Gave me an excuse to use up all of my scraps. Wherever their light color was, I've chose a dark. Started with a big print with a lot of colors in it, and that way I can pull in all of my scraps. So I'll start with a nice big red square in the center. My flying geese units have the dark where theirs with the white. I'm keeping them all in the same direction as they have. I've just changed the colors. This was their medium, and I have a light. And as I've been doing this, I haven't really concentrated on the color placement. I've just been using up whatever fabric that I have that matches that size the best. By doing that, it really gives you an opportunity to use the scraps. And the fun is you never know what the block is going to look like. Their light is my dark, the dark for those solids. And for those half square triangles, I did the background as the dark, and I did a dark green. So they almost look like a solid block. So that is how my block should be laid out. However, I'm going to be able to change this block up because there's a lot of components that are the same size. Or I can switch up these components. When these 2 pieces are stitched together, it's going to equal the same size that I have for that solid piece. So I could switch those up too. Turn the flying geese so they're flying out, or switch them. And I can still switch the angle of the flying geese. So it's looking like you have a big block, some little squares, and the star ends up coming to the outside. I'm going to sew all the blocks together, the same as the original pattern. And the only change was I've changed these 2 blocks. Scrappy variation is now done. We have both of the blocks done, and we're ready for next month. 2 more blocks done for the Rainbow Sorbet Follow Along Block of the Month. I'll put a link in the description so you too can follow along. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.